thank you. That's nice. Hello. This is the difficult talking slot in the day because everybody just ate lunch. Everybody's a little sleepy. I'll try and keep it interesting, I hope. If you feel that you're getting sleepy and you want me to speak louder or be more interesting, then just wave, please, to let me know. So the talk immediately before lunch was actually a really good preparation for this talk. It was a very nice on-ramp for me. So thank you, Vishwesh, for making that easy for me. I feel like he's warmed you up very nicely to the idea of why you should speak to your product's users and listen to what they have to say. And I guess I want to follow on from that in this talk by discussing the difference between having a design opinion and actually having evidence to support design. So I work for Equal Experts. I'm a user experience designer. I'm not a designer by background. I actually come from an academic psychology background. But my job is to speak to users and understand where they're finding things difficult, and then to convey that information to the team, turn it into designs, either myself or working with other designers and the developers, so that we make things that work for everybody. I'm sorry about this slide is a little bleached. So sometimes people show, I hope you can see that this is a very, very busy user interface, even if the gray has gone a little bit in the projection. But hopefully what you can see is that there's a lot of detail here. And sometimes people, particularly at user experience conferences, like to stand up and quote things like this, that engineers don't let other engineers design UIs because then they get very, very busy. But actually what I want to say is that this can be okay, that sometimes it's completely fine for a user interface to be busy because we have to consider the context. For example, if the users are subject matter experts, there is nothing wrong with a busy user interface. So the Bloomberg terminal, classically, the finance trading terminal, is the most complex piece of UI ever, really. But it's fine. Pilots operating an aircraft, they have a very complex user interface. That's fine too, because they're subject matter experts. Also, if the data is grouped in ways that make sense to the users, so the information architecture is good, so for example, all of the things that belong together are placed together, then that makes a busy user interface much easier to use because the groupings are intuitive. If a busy user interface works for real users in a realistic scenario, then great. I applaud it. It doesn't have to be beautiful, as we talked about just before lunch. It has to be functional first. It's nice if it's beautiful, but sometimes we get distracted by trying to create something beautiful. The first thing is it must be usable. And lastly, if your really busy user interface is actually better than what was there before, great. Okay, it might not be the last step, but it's a good first step. So I'm not here to stand here and talk about how user interfaces must be sort of beautiful all the time. Often they can just be functional, and that's quite enough. It depends who it's for, it depends why they're using it, how they're using it. If you can delight people, then that's great. But if you can produce something that helps them do their jobs and be awesome, then that's even better to me. So sometimes I think people think about design as this process of beautiful things. You know, you've got this kind of design ideal. I'm going to craft. I'm going to, don't talk to me. I'm designing. I'm having an idea, right? You know, it's this artistic process, and I'm up in the clouds somewhere having a vision. But this is not design. Design is not that process. Maybe that's art. I'm not sure. This is what design is to me. Design is build, test, iterate. Because you have to have something that is functional. It has to be usable. And to know whether it's functional, you have to test it. So actually design for UI purposes, but really design in general, design of a chair, design of anything, should be design, test, iterate. You can't go off and ideate some amazing idea and then go, here, I present to you my vision, my complete vision, and it's perfect for everybody and there are no problems. That just doesn't happen. So I'm not paid, as a user experience person, I'm not paid to have a vision and deliver and say, here you are, build this. I'm paid to validate design choices. Some of those choices are my choices and my decisions. Some of those are other people's. But my job is to go and find out whether these things are really actually good. Because while it's still in my head, it's only an idea. When I put it in front of someone, that's when we find out whether it's good or not. I love this quote. I know it's a little bit long, but I love it, and it's worth thinking about as a whole. So this is a guy called James Bridle in the UK, and he says, "The network now so obviously and explicitly extends beyond the bounds of the individual being able to say anything useful or conclusive on or about it in isolation, that telling someone your opinion is like telling them about your dreams." Which is to say, this software, the internet, this stuff that we all work on now, it's so huge, it's so vast and complicated that having an opinion is no longer enough. Maybe in the first days it used to be, but now it really is not. So just to take and modulate that a tiny little bit, telling someone your design opinion is like telling them about your dreams. You know, it carries no weight. It's nice, you have an opinion, good for you. Let's go test it. Let's find out whether it holds water, you know, whether it's a solid design. There's a lovely quote that says, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." We do, we have to bring data. Opinion is not enough. Now, this is a very old quote, but I think it's it's really the same thing. This is just, it's this, right? So this is what data looks like. I don't know how well you can see this. Some kids in a tent in a garden. So this, to me, is convincing data, right? Like, something needs to change. This is not one experimental participant. This is not one user having a problem. This is, obviously it loops. It's not actually 50 kids. But the only way, this is exactly what I look for when I go to test designs. The only way to know if your design is going to trip people up is actually to test it for real, to watch and see if people fall down. If they don't fall down, great. If they do fall down, okay, let's do something else. Another way of phrasing this, no battle plan survives contact with the enemy. Again, this is an old quote, an old idea, and I've modified it slightly. No design survives contact with the user. You have this vision of how things are going to go, and then you get in the field, and everything changes. 2 minutes later, everything is broken, everything is wrong, all your ideas are no good. But that's great, right? That's productive. The worst days that I have doing what I do is when somebody comes in and they're super bright and they're super articulate and nothing goes wrong. And that's almost a wasted day for me because I didn't learn very much from that person. So a good day for me is when someone comes in who is frightened of technology, who isn't sure about the application, maybe they've never used it before, who is very lacking in self-confidence, who is confused, because those are the days when I take home all the good stuff. That's when we learn the most. And as we were hearing before lunch, the best teachers that you can have are your customers. So users are the #1 experts on whether your product works well or not. That's so important. Another quote, "It blew my mind how much hand-holding users require. I've seen users misunderstand propositions entirely, miss huge calls to action, and ignore clear, basic microcopy." I see this often. This is from someone who hadn't previously done very much user research, and then he had a session, he worked for a few months in a company where they did it a lot, and it just totally transformed his views of why it's so important to do this. And it is true. You think that you have made a watertight design, everything is clear, everything is beautiful, everything works perfectly, and then you put it in front of a user and nope, everything is wrong. It's interesting. It's very humbling, actually. It's a very humbling experience to realize that what you thought was great design is actually terrible. I'm sorry, I don't know where this is from. A friend shared it with me on Twitter, and it's great. So in case you can't read it because of the projection, sorry. User-centered design, right? This is when someone says to a user, well, what do you need? Like, what do you need to be able to do in your work? Well, I just want to quickly get to the information that I need. So this is like when you interview people and you test and you kind of iterate and you ask them what they want and then you try and build something for that. And that's user-centered design. The other option is user-centered design, when you kind of have a smell. You can maybe smell what users want, like, from your desk. No. So you sit there and you think, oh, what might a user want? Oh, I know. As a user, I would like the validation on the login page to be, very clear so that I can easily see when I've made a mistake during a login. Trust me, users do not sit around and think, wow, I wish the login page was clear. I wish validation worked really well. Users are not thinking about validation. So I guess when we sit at our desks and we imagine what users might want, it's not really enough because we can go off in the wrong direction so easily. So I want to share with you today some examples of when I have had good design intentions and the team that I've been working on has had a prototype or a wireframe or something like that to test. And we've thought, this is good, we'll put it in front of users, and we got shot down really quickly. So I want you to learn from my mistakes, if you like. I don't think anyone actually really ever learns from their mistakes, but you can laugh at my mistakes if you would like. And basically, having a good design intention is never enough. It doesn't matter. Let's go get data. So, yeah, this is going to be difficult. So this is a little bleached. What you're seeing here, this is a wireframe. I spent a little time a few years ago working at Skype, and this is just a wireframe of the stuff that we were testing, where you have everyone uses or used Skype at some point, right? Yeah? So you have like an address book with all your contacts in it, and you choose one of the contacts, and yep, none of that is showing on the projector at all, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of explaining of this. I hope that's all right. You view one contact, and you have the option to add tags. So, you might want to tag people, family, or work, or colleagues, or, particular groups of people, however you want to do it. And you click on Add Tags, and a modal pops up. And you can type to add tags, and after you've added a couple of tags, you can then say, okay, right, add these tags to this person so that I can find them easily in the future and so that I can group my contacts. And people went from this to, has it happened? Now, what you can't see on here, I'm afraid, is that the tags have appeared in the UI next to where it says add tags. But users had no idea. Users went genuinely from, I'm doing a thing, a modal has popped up, I'm adding some tags, to where did the tags go? And they just weren't sure if it had happened because this was a new feature for them. They didn't know where tagging lived, so they had clicked on it, they'd followed the call to action, they clicked on it, opened the modal goes away, I don't know if it worked. And this made me realize that what was actually happening is a thing called change blindness. So in psychology, this is a really easy to replicate phenomenon, and I hope that I'm going to be able to demonstrate this to you just now. So that just about works. Okay, I'm going to make this picture flicker a little bit, and something is going to change in the picture, so I want you to watch for the change. Hopefully this will project okay. Oh, there you go. Something is changing. If you can see it, put your hand up when it flickers. Anyone? Anyone else? A few people? What is changing? Right, the railing, the bar at the back is going up and down every time it flickers. Can you all see that now? But you didn't notice it before, right? Amazing. So this is a thing called change blindness, and you can show this with lots of different things. Essentially, when there is any kind of visual discontinuity, like a flicker, like we did here, or you imagine when you're driving, the windscreen wipers in the rain, and what seems to happen is essentially the visual system resets itself. So you retain the sense of what is happening, you have the overall scene, but you lose the details. Every time something makes you look again, you have to look at the individual details again. And so you can forget the small details. And so what is happening when people go from this modal back to the main UI is that they have that discontinuity, they have that brief moment where the attention kind of stops and then starts up again. And they know where they are, but they've lost the details. And so the take-home from this, really, is that you want to animate something. So you want something to kind of come in and animate where your new information is to sort of help people identify, oh, okay, that's where that went. So in this scenario, what you would want is something like modal, okay, dismiss the modal, and then about half a second to a second later, animate the thing that just changed so the person can go, oh, right, I see where it is, and I see that my change has affected correctly. So as a general point, because of change blindness, you want to call attention to any time the screen gets wiped. If you've made a change, then you probably want to call attention to it. And this doesn't just affect modals. It can be when you transition from one web page to another or from one screen to another in the app. If you have made a change and there is also some kind of transition, then quite often people won't notice it, and it's good to call it out with an animation or something else. Oh, good, that can be read. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done in the UK for gov.uk. So this is the government platform for all citizen-facing transactions, essentially, to do with government. And I worked for a little while on the visa application form there. And I should say, I had to apply for a work visit visa to come here to India, and I should say that your form is much shorter and much easier to do than the UK form used to be, at least, and it's much more straightforward. There are a lot of questions in the work visas to go to the UK, and I mean a lot. If anyone here has had to fill one in, then I can only apologize. What we tried to do is we tried to make it shorter, easier, more usable, and we ended up with a declaration, so you get to the end and you have to declare that everything that you have said in this form is correct, and you understand that if anything is wrong, you can be taken away and put in a sack or something. I don't know what they do with you, but this is the short version, by the way. This is like that we spent a lot of time with the policy people arguing them down to something that was shorter and easier to read. And people still didn't read it. Now, it's difficult to test this because this was not people filling out a live application. This was people, before we put this live, reading it. And pretty much everybody just kind of looked at it and went, oh, it's a declaration. Scroll to the bottom, click OK. Because this is how we've trained people, right? Not to read the small print, essentially. And actually, I blame things like this, where you've got to read 40 pages of something. It's worse on a phone, actually, like the iTunes terms and conditions on the iPhone. Like there's this tiny scroll bar or, 50 pages. Nah. If I had to design something like an end-user license agreement or something, I think I would just do this, basically. Because that's about how much attention people pay to it. I've seen so many people just go, whatever. You put a modal up or you put any kind of permissions thing, and people are just like, yeah, whatever. I just want to get rid of it. I just want to get on with the thing that I came here to do. People don't like to be interrupted. They're also, I think everybody is pretty fatalistic about how we say yes to licenses and agreements. We know that they probably own us. We know they probably just signed a thing in blood to say that they can have our house and our children and all of this. But we just want to do the thing that we came here to do, so we dismiss it. So my take home from all of the work around particularly the visas thing, which is very wordy and very technical, there's a lot of legal in it, is that if you want people to read it, you have to make it short. The longer stuff was, the more people just scrolled and they didn't read. And again, it's a little difficult to test because this was not a real live visa application. People told us that if it was for real, they would read it carefully. I don't know. I can't, it's hard to test that. And we also saw this length problem when it came to form design. So this is the first iteration. We didn't have any styling to start with. It was just sort of very plain app. And this is probably about 2 months after we started. And what we found when we tested this was a real code. It wasn't live, but it was, it was real working production code. What we found when we tested forms like this is that people tended to miss out fields. So there was too much on the page, and it was very easy for them to miss things. And it also it created problems because if you missed one or two things, then you have a very long page. And how do you attract people's attention to the errors? Do you scroll them to the top? And then say you have 3 missing pieces of data, or you have 3 errors, and then they have to go down the page and they have to find the errors. Long pages make it really difficult to deal with multiple errors, so it's quite hard. So one of the things I learned from that is that you should make it easier for people to recover from mistakes or from failure states. And one way to do that is to make the page a lot shorter, so it's always much clearer where the error is if they've made one. Another problem with this, and another reason that I think people are really missing content on the page, is that there are no labels for the fields. So where you might put in your day and birth, the day and month and year of birth, there's already something in there. And this is violating a rule that Caroline Jarrett calls, she says that basically forms are a conversation. That when you're asking someone to fill in a form, what you're really doing is having a conversation with them. So the labels in the forms, or the questions in the forms, are basically you saying your bit, asking the question, and then you need to provide a space for the respondent, the user, to put their bit in. And you should take turns. And so if we look again at this form here, it looks to me like I can't put anything in there, right? Like someone's taken my turn for me. My eyes will kind of gloss over that because those don't look like empty form fields. And I've seen this again recently at another client where, that's hard to read, sorry. These are two form fields on a login form. And it's actually just asking for a bit more information. So someone's gone through the sign-up process, and then we say, could we just have a little bit more information about you? And these are labels, field of study and academic status. And I saw a user just kind of glance over the page and then click the Get Started button because she had clearly looked at these fields, the field labels, and thought, I don't need to put anything in here. These fields are full. So we didn't let her have her turn in the conversation because the label is where her answer would be. This is one of those clever, nice interactive forms where the label is in place of the field. It's a placeholder, effectively. And then when you click in the field, when you put it in focus, that animates upwards, and you can type underneath it. But the effect of designing it like that is such that it looks full. It doesn't look like there's anywhere for me to have my part of the conversation. So on the visas form, we ended up with stuff that looks much more like this, except with real forms in it. I'm sorry, this is a little bleached. Hopefully you can see that okay. Where there's a clear label and then there's a space to respond. There's a label and a space to respond. And it's very clear. The blank bits are very clear. What you see in eye tracking studies is that people are looking for the blank bits. They just want to know where to type. They're looking for the next space where they can put something in. So a good rule is to signal when it's the other person's turn to talk. Make it really clear. Make the spacing on the page, make the form fields on the page ready for the other person to feel welcome in there and to have their say. It's a good, polite conversation to have in your UI. We had a very interesting time with some of the questions in the form, and they were never the questions that you thought they were going to be. I thought that designing a visa form would involve a lot of complicated policy discussions, and I was right about that. But I was not right about simple things like asking people their name. So we had a conversation with them and said, look, sometimes people only have one name. I know that happens here in India. Sometimes you don't necessarily have a given name and a surname or a family name and Christian name, whatever. And they said, we're sorry, but the back-end system that you're integrating with needs two fields. It needs a given name and a family name, and we have to populate those. In the past, the solution to that would have been to say, if you don't have two names, put an asterisk in one field, put a star in one field. But that's not a great message to send to someone. Lie about your name in the form, because, my name is not Chris Star. That I don't want to put a mistake in the form. When I get to the end of the form, it's going to tell me that if I've put anything incorrect in here, then there will be dire consequences. So it's bad to make people lie in a form and then tell them that if they lie in the form, they're going to be in trouble. We should, the form should flex to the user. Users should not have to bend to the shape of the form. So we lost that fight. We wanted one field where people could just write their whole name, but it didn't work because it needed to go into two fields in the database. So that was how that was. And then we said, okay, well, how do we ask people if they're known by any other names? And we started off with, I only have one name. Now, think for a minute about how you would interpret that. We meant, is your name, one word? People looked at the copy, I only have one name, and they went, they were like, oh, well, I don't have a middle name, so I guess I only have one name. Like, my name's Chris, not Chris something, and then the surname. Or they said, well, I've never been married, so I guess I do only have one name. Yeah, we spent a long time. Basically, this happened. We put this copy in front of people, that happened, and we thought, okay, I only have a single name. No, I didn't work either. People were like, well, I do only have a single name. I've never been married. You know, they meant single as in not married, so it's really hard. And in the end, we ended up with a couple of things. So quite a nice design pattern. The first is, I'm not sure how to enter my name. So this covers everybody, right? This is like everybody who may have a problem with having two fields to put your name in. It explains what to do if you have junior after your name or the third or whatever. If you have middle names, it explains where to put them. And then below that, like the edgiest of edge cases, I don't have a given and family name. My name is one word. And then if you clicked on that, it would give you a form field to type your name in, and that would exempt the other fields from validating. So we solved it eventually, but it took like 4 iterations of this thing to get it right. And it was difficult because when we envisaged the problem, we had no idea how people would interpret it, and then they gave us all these other answers. So we learned, apart from solving our problem, we learned a really good pattern, which is I'm not sure about X is a great way of recovering from a thing. So it's a good design pattern where you recognize that not 100% of people will be able to fill in the field or click the button or do whatever. It's a kind of a good get out. And what I like about I'm not sure about this thing or this doesn't apply to me or whatever is people to whom that does not apply can miss it. If you just make it small, if you put it in here, people who don't need that won't even read it. They won't look at it. They won't matter. They've filled in the bits of the form. They know what to do. People who are struggling will start looking around the page, and they'll find this thing that you left there for them. So it's a really helpful design pattern for the few % of people who your form can't accommodate. Then we got to the question about criminal convictions. Now, this, as you see, this is a sort of a list of things that you might need to acknowledge in the process of applying for a work visa for the UK. Criminal convictions, driving offences, I was arrested or charged, I may have to go to court, etc. This started life as the question, do you have any criminal convictions? Yes, no. Everybody went straight to the no button, right? Because, you know, we're not criminals, right? But they didn't read. There was extra text that said, if you have if you've had a speeding ticket or any kind of driving convictions, then you need to answer yes. But in their heads, well, I'm not a criminal, so straight to the no button. And so we had to go around a couple of times to understand, really, that when you say criminal, people just write, no, that's not me, I'm not a criminal. And actually, this was a much better way of asking, because then people do kind of have to read all the options. If you put it in the hint text, then they might just skip over that because they're looking for the form field. They're looking for the bit that they can click or type in to move on. So good rule of thumb, people give themselves the benefit of the doubt. They think of themselves as good people, try to phrase questions in ways that don't immediately turn them off. And so, of course, that's not me. We had a similar issue, in fact, with we have to ask a question about, have you ever committed any war crimes? And, you know, of course, everybody said, no, why do you even have to ask me this? But you imagine someone perhaps who was drafted against their will in a time of war or sort of conflict in a part of the world. They didn't want to do it. They might not even be aware that the things that they were asked to do as part of being asked to sign up to the military or being drafted to the military were war crimes. It's a really complicated space. And we didn't really adequately solve that. People are working on that project now, and I hope they're having progress with it. It's complicated to ask people about this stuff. We also asked them if they were applying if they were applying for a job in a shortage occupation. Now, the definition of shortage occupation is really specific. It's this sort of weird 15-page document that you have to download from the government website. It gets updated once a month. And it's those positions where we're really keen to fill job roles, and we would actively like to recruit people from overseas to fill those roles. But what happens when people look at this is they go, well, of course it's a shortage occupation. That's why I'm applying for a work visa, i.e., I wouldn't be able to apply for this visa if you didn't need me in this job. So everybody self-selected as a shortage occupation, regardless of what they did for a living, because they assumed that that is how a visa works, that, you can only come if there is actually a job. So what we took away from this is that when you share your user interface with users, it reveals their mental models, the ways that they think about the world. So you can learn a lot about how people conceptualize the world, how they think about visas, how they think about the process of visas. And this was really apparent when we asked them about money. So there was a requirement in the visa to ask about whether you've had sufficient money. What this is really for is to say, if you come to the UK, before you even start working, are you going to be able to find somewhere to live, feed yourself, and so on, just to the point until your employer starts paying you. But everybody interpreted this as asking about money because you were going to need to give your bank details and you were going to need to pay, and we wanted to know that you could pay for the visa. It's a completely reasonable assumption, right? Because if I'm going to apply for a visa, they do need to know my payment details, and they probably want to know that I have enough money. It's a bit intrusive to be asked about whether I've had this money for 90 days, but okay. So everybody interpreted this as really just being about paying for the visa, and actually it's not. They didn't really, it was very, very hard to communicate why we actually wanted this information. And it got really, sorry, this is, I think, a little hard to read. It got really difficult also when the burden of proof is that you have to provide some documentation for this. And so you have to show that you've had so much money in your bank for the last 90 days, but then you have to make sure the most recent documents that you're sending, so your bank statements or your building society book or whatever you have, they can't be older than 31 days old. So at the point where you're applying for this visa, you think, well, okay, tomorrow I'll go to the bank and I'll get the statements, and those will be current then. And okay, so I have to send the visa within 31 days. But then I might not send the visa for another week because there's some other documentation that I have to get. So are the bank statements still good at that point? Is this the last 90 days at that point? Like, because the last 90 days is from when you got the bank statements, but do you see what I mean? Like, the phrasing of the form is really difficult, and the policy underpinning it is really complicated. And it's really contrary, because no one really knows whether the bank statements that they're sending are still good or not. And a big thing that I learned from this was that when you try and design a really clear user interface, it exposes whether policy is actually clear. It exposes whether the business rules underneath are really clear. If you can't design a clear UI, it's a good indication that the business rules about the thing that you're trying to build a UI for might be really complicated. And it shows the business, we were sort of showing these to policy experts and saying, what do you want? Do you want the last 90 days, or do you want the last 90 days with a margin of error of 31 days? Tell us. And when you surface this stuff in a UI, it just makes it really clear to the business what it is that you're actually asking of people. So this is all fine, but maybe some of you are sitting here thinking, well, we don't have anyone who kind of thinks about user experience, or we don't have customer focus, we're a software house, or we build software, or I work by myself, and I build software for myself. Like, how do I do all this stuff? And all of the stuff that I've shown you, it was not particularly time-consuming or expensive, and it repaid the investment many times over. So I want to talk about sort of minimum viable UX, if you like, how you can bring this in. Can you put up your hand if you don't currently have any sort of formal UX process in your... Quite a few people. Thank you. Can you put up your hand if you do have some kind of front-end UI, but you don't really have a feedback loop from customers that goes into that process? Sorry, that was a complicated question. A couple of people. Okay. Can you put up your hand if everything I've said so far is a no-brainer and... okay. Oh, excellent. See me after. I need to pick your brain, please. So I just wanted to say a few things to close, really, about what you can do. So the first thing to do is that you need to step outside of your own head. You cannot possibly have thought of everything. We're good, but we're not that good. So you need to be able to get out of your own head. And the easiest way is to show your design to someone else. Ideally, you want to show it to someone outside the building, though. So it's not great to talk about it within your team because you all know too much. You know much too much. The users may know nothing at all about how your thing is put together, the back-end system underpinning it. They don't know, and honestly, most of them don't care. So try and get out of the building. Try and find somebody who does not know very much. Even if you just talk to one user, just one person or a proxy for a user. It doesn't have to be an exact user. It could be someone who demographically fits the bill or someone who wants similar things to your users. Just show them it. Just get some feedback. If you need to, you can give them coffee and biscuits. Take them for 10 minutes and say, let me buy you something, people really like to be listened to, actually. You wouldn't think that coffee and biscuits is very, very much reward, but actually, to be listened to for 10 minutes or half an hour, to be given, a cup of coffee and a biscuit or something like that, people like that. It's really surprising. And that gives you an opportunity to get some feedback. This is a great quote. This just encapsulates everything. I've never left a research session thinking I've learned nothing today. You learn something every single time, even from the most bright and articulate people, even from those people who have no problems at all using your app. They will say something, and you'll take it away and think, I can use that in future. Maybe not tomorrow, but in future. So every time that you sit down with a user is going to be valuable, and you're going to take something new away. And then when you've done that, do it again with someone else. Take a colleague with you this time, maybe. Get it on video if you possibly can. So, sorry, you can't see this. I promise there is UI on the screen. We don't blindfold our users, by the way. This is just for anonymity. It would make it a lot harder to test, I think. The good thing about using video, so using screen captures, you can do it in QuickTime, or there are tools for this where you can record the user's face as well, is that you can then share that with the rest of your team. You can play it back, you can unpack it, you can talk about it. Really helpful. And also, if you're having difficulty getting people to prioritize this work, show it to senior stakeholders. There is nothing as compelling as showing people something like this, right? And then you get a room full of people just going, oh, that is what you want. That is actually what I live for. That's my job happening really well, is all these people going, oh, we have to build it again. We have to do it differently. That's great, right? We can work with that. You can use that as leverage. You can get what you need at that point, because now these people are experiencing vicarious pain and they are willing to do what you tell them. That makes me sound very Machiavellian and manipulative. I promise I'm not, but it's no good me giving an opinion, right? I have to show what is actually happening. And that's more compelling than me standing there and saying, I think you should do this, when actually these people need to see what is really happening on the ground. So my goal is to make the whole team uncomfortable until the users are no longer uncomfortable. If you had an opinion that the design was bad, like if the design is not yours and you go and show it to people and you think, oh, this is a terrible design, it'll never work, and people have no problems with it whatsoever, then great, you have nothing to worry about. And you didn't look stupid by standing there going, I think that's a terrible design. Nothing is lost. You haven't lost face. Everything's fine. So put your opinion aside and just look for the data. Look to see what users are actually telling you. So you can't always get what you want if what you want is that unicorn vision of I have created, here it is, worship it. But you can get what you need, and you just need to listen to users and let them tell you what to do, essentially. And that's it. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? Would anyone like to ask a question? No. No questions. Okay, if you don't want to ask me right now, I'll be around all the rest of the afternoon. Please come and chat to me, and I'm happy to. Or you can talk to me on Twitter, or you can email me as well. Thank you.